Okay, I thought now would be a good opportunity to continue my Prime Minister series. I've been making videos talking briefly about British Prime Ministers from Walpole to Cameron, and we've got up to Prime Minister number 16. Apologies for my cold, so I'll try not to make this too long, but I would like to make it now. I've just watched the film Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis, and there's an interesting coincidence I've noticed about the man that I'm about to speak about and Lincoln. They have two things in common. Um, Outwardly, they have little else in common, but two notable things in common, and I'll come to that in a minute. But the 16th Prime Minister was Lord Grenville, or Baron Grenville, as he was also known as. His full name was William Grenville, first Baron Grenville. He was the younger son of George Grenville, who was Prime Minister from 1763 to 1765, I believe. So William Grenville was his son. So he came from a political family, just like the Pitts. William Grenville was born in 1759 at Wootton Underwood in Buckinghamshire, and he was a Pittite Tory and a friend of William Pitt the Younger. In fact, he was not only a friend of William Pitt the Younger, he was related to the Pitt family by marriage, on the grounds that his father's sister had been married to William Pitt the Elder. So the younger Grenville was the first cousin of William Pitt the Younger. So they weren't just friends; they were cousins as well. I believe he's been featured in one or two films in minor roles. There's one major achievement that Lord Grenville had, and I think it's quite unfortunate really that he's not a better remembered figure, because although he wasn't an outstanding Prime Minister and although his time in office was quite short, this achievement I believe is monumental, and that was the abolition of the slave trade in the United Kingdom. In other words, under his ministry, it was illegal to have imported slaves on British soil. It still continued in the British Empire until the tenure of the Earl Grey in the 1830s, but I think this was a very monumental thing. Now, he came into office just after the death of William Pitt the Younger, and he was in office for just over a year, from February 1806 to March 1807. One of the first things he done, well, the first thing he done really, was form the Ministry of All the Talents, which was some of the leading statesmen of the day. That included such figures as Charles James Fox, Viscount Sidmouth, the former Prime Minister Henry Addington, Lord Henry Petty, the Marquess of Lansdowne. He invited George Canning, but Canning refused. This was also in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars, so he was a wartime Prime Minister. He had a lot on his plate. Now, I've done some research into his role in the abolition of slavery, and sometimes we give credit to Prime Ministers when something happened during their tenure, when actually the credit belongs to someone else. However, in the case of Lord Grenville, it wasn't just a coincidence that happened in his tenure. He was personally a passionate advocate for abolition. He was a staunch abolitionist, and I've come across some quotes by him. He found the slave trade to be detestable. Although his personality, he was said to be aloof and cold, but he was respected and also reliable. I found a quotation, and I'm going to try and find it. This is it, when he was trying to push through the bill for the abolition of the slave trade. What right do we derive from any human institution or any divine ordinance to tell the natives of Africa to deprive them by force of the means of labouring for their own advantage, and to compel them to labour for our profit? Can there be a question that the character of the country ought to be cleared from the stain impressed by the guilt of such traffic, by the effect of which we keep Africa in a state of barbarity and desolation? Twice has this measure failed in this House, and if this iniquitous traffic is not now abolished, the guilt will rest on your lordships. And the signs that he was a staunch abolitionist going way back to the 1780s. So this wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't something that just happened to happen during his term. I would argue in the same way that John Quincy Adams is sometimes overlooked for his role in the abolition. With all due respect to Abraham Lincoln, who played a massive role in it for freeing the slaves, there were other American statesmen who played an equally important role, or at least a very significant role, and one of them is a character that is played in the film Lincoln, played by Tommy Lee Jones. That was Thaddeus Stevens. So likewise, Lord Grenville in Britain is more or less a forgotten figure, but he was the man who basically abolished slavery in the United Kingdom. It was Earl Grey who abolished it in the British Empire, and of course other figures like Aquino and Wilberforce. But I think Lord Grenville does deserve some more recognition for this. And bearing in mind that he went up against a hostile House of Lords. I mean, they were pushing for economic arguments in favour of slavery, and he was pushing for moral arguments against it, at a time when it was not easy to do so. Bear in mind, this is 50 years before the Gettysburg Address. So you need to understand the environment of that time. So I do think that Lord Grenville deserves a little bit more recognition. Now there's one interesting coincidence that I've noticed. Lord Grenville was our 16th Prime Minister. Lincoln was the 16th American President. Grenville was going up a hostile House of Lords. Lincoln was going up, in many quarters, a very hostile House of Representatives, although it was passed. And likewise in Britain it was passed eventually. And both men had their country in the midst of war. Now in the case of Lincoln it was a civil war, in the case of Grenville it was war on the European mainland. But I think that Grenville should be a little bit better remembered. Perhaps one reason he's overlooked is because the Ministry of Talents wasn't particularly successful in other areas, and it collapsed after just a year. But his one achievement was a major achievement. So for that reason I do think he should be a little bit better recognised. I'm not saying he's Lincoln-esque. I'm not saying he is de facto Britain's Abraham Lincoln. But this is a profound achievement. And it wasn't just coincidence. He personally was a staunch abolitionist, and he worked tirelessly for it. So that's something significant about Lord Grenville. And it is a pity he's not better remembered. So just some last information to round up. He died in 1834 at the age of 74 at Burnham in Buckinghamshire. He also acquired Dropmore House, which is a stately home in, I believe, in, just checking out the county now, in Buckinghamshire, Burnham, Buckinghamshire. And it was a grand stately home which was common for noblemen of the day to have stately homes. And it said that some 2,500 trees were planted. By the time that Grenville died, he had the biggest collection of conifer trees in Britain. Anyway, that was our 16th Prime Minister, Lord Grenville.